Israel is, in my view, even after October 7th, the best guarantee for a much persecuted people that we can control not only our security, but have an opportunity to express ourselves most freely in both our individual and our collective identity as a Jew and as a member of this remarkable people and civilization. And that is a right that we extend, the world extends, to almost every other people in the world. I don't think many of us stop and ask, why should Japan, for instance, why should the Japanese have a nation state? We take it as a given. Why should the Danes? Why should Mexicans? But with Israel, that has been, and with the Jews, that has been contested for a very long time.
Bret Stephens is a popular opinion columnist for the New York Times. He has held that position since 2017. He was previously a foreign affairs columnist and deputy editorial page editor at the Wall Street Journal. In 2013, he received the Pulitzer Prize for commentary. From 2002 until 2004, he was editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post in Israel. Stephens holds degrees from the University of Chicago and the London School of Economics. Part of this conversation, now on YouTube, covered many things, including the negotiations to end the war, the Strait of Hormuz, the price of oil and gasoline, Iran's nuclear program, and the status of their enriched uranium. Also, President Trump's war leadership, the war response of the regime in Iran, and the consequences of war. Part 2 of our conversation will continue now with America at its 250th birthday, also its relationship with Israel and the world. Tell me what Israel means to you.
Israel is, in my view, even after October 7th, the best guarantee for a much persecuted people that we can control not only our security, but have an opportunity to express ourselves most freely in both our individual and our collective identity as a Jew and as a member of this remarkable people and civilization. And that is a right that we extend, the world extends, to almost every other people in the world. I don't think many of us stop and ask, why should Japan, for instance, why should the Japanese have a nation state? We take it as a given. Why should the Danes? Why should Mexicans? But with Israel, that has been, and with the Jews, that has been contested for a very long time. You know, I sometimes hear people allege that Israel is a colonialist enterprise. That is the exact opposite of the truth. Zionism, in its fullest sense, is an effort to create and restore and maintain Jewish political sovereignty in our ancestral homeland, is the oldest anti-colonial struggle in history. We were, as a Jewish people, fighting colonialism 2,500 years ago when the colonizers were the Babylonians. We call that the Babylonian captivity. Hanukkah, Jewish Christmas, is I put that in quotation marks just for the record, is a commemoration of Jewish struggle against Greek colonialism. We struggled against Roman colonialism. We struggled against Byzantine colonialism. We struggled against Mamluk colonialism. We struggled against Ottoman colonialism. And we struggled against British colonialism. It's the oldest anti-colonial struggle in history. And it's an astounding fact that after 1900 years or more of perseverance, this state of Israel was created and has endured and even thrived over 78 very tumultuous years in which most of its neighbors at one point or another were not only bent on its defeat, but on its annihilation. You know, in World War II, we defeated Germany. We did not annihilate Germany. But Israel's neighbors, certainly the Iranians, if they had the opportunity, they wouldn't just beat Israel in order to obtain better terms or change the borders. They would want to annihilate us, and Israel would, the Jewish people, 8 million Jews or so in Israel, would end up being violently dispossessed. And the tragedy of Jewish history, which is not just the Holocaust, but centuries of persecution before that, would come back. And I desperately want that not to happen. And I would add just one final point. You know, visit Tel Aviv, Charlie. Visit Jerusalem. Visit so many places in Israel. Will you find extremists, political or religious extremists? Yes, you will. Will you find obnoxious politicians? Yes, you will. Will you find skullduggery? Yes, you will. You will also find an amazingly vibrant, alive, purposeful, sexy, vibrant culture of people who are energetically reconstituting a genuinely fascinating and historically and culturally and civilizationally important mechanism or node of human expression, human creativity, and human genius.
How was it changed by October 7th?
Well, October 7th shook the belief that for all of the threats that Israel faced, that Israel remained something like an impregnable fortress for Jews. The Jews were safer under the protection of a Jewish army in Tel Aviv than they were under the protection of, say, a French army or French gendarmes in Paris. It shook that in a way that nothing has, not even the 1973 war had shaken it. On the other hand, you have to look at where Israel is today. Indisputably, the most significant, the most capable regional power, all of its enemies, if not defeated, then massively reduced as threats to it. And that earns my respect, because that was won by an army of reservists who left jobs in high tech or whatever else they were doing to come to the defense of this homeland. You know, there's polling data, Charlie, that shows that something like only 33% of Britons would be willing to take up arms in defense of Britain. Smaller percentages in other European countries. I was in Israel after October 7th on doing some reporting on an Israeli military base just outside of Gaza, literally 100 yards out of Gaza. And I was talking with a young man who was DJing raves in Brazil on October 6th. And when October 7th struck, you know, he could have stayed in Brazil. He could have had a happy, joyful life on the party scene in Rio. He got on a plane and donned a uniform. Doesn't matter what you think of Netanyahu. It says something about a country that it can engender such profound loyalty among its citizens that they will take those kind of life-threatening risks to defend what they have gained at such cost.
Yeah, I totally understand and agree with that. In our own country, young men and women joined the military after 9/11.
Yeah. Yes, and young men and women.
George Bush and others joined the military after Pearl Harbor.
I was just reading about Kingman Brewster, the former president
of Yale.
Kingman Brewster was a leading light of the America First movement in 1941.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Led by Charles Lindbergh. He was organizing the America First Club at Yale, I believe. And but come December 7th, 1941, Kingman Brewster, the first thing he did is sign up for military service. If we're going to have democracies that are genuinely resilient and can survive against very determined enemies, whether they're in Tehran or Moscow or Beijing, we have to know what we're about and also know that there are things about our country and our way of life and our civilization which are worth fighting and even dying for.
This is all vitally important to understanding the Middle East and vitally important to understanding how you look at this war and what might happen. With respect to Israel and Palestinians, can you imagine some pathway to living side by side?
Look, I'm now in a minority on this view, but I'm in favor of a two-state solution. I don't think that the purpose of Zionism was Jewish self-rule. It was the opportunity of Jews not to be ruled by others, but also not to rule over others. And I don't think we actually we fulfill, or rather I should say, the purposes of Zionism are fulfilled until the millions of Palestinians who don't want their lives substantially controlled by Israel can live in a sovereign state of their own, peacefully, side by side with their Israeli neighbors, with their Jewish neighbors. But that has to happen not simply by drawing a line and saying, okay, you guys to the left and you others to the right. It has to happen when, in my view, when a majority of Palestinians say, right, we're not going back to Yaffo, or we're not going to seek to replace the state of Israel. We're going to seek to live side by side and have a prosperous state of our own. And that's going to require more than just political changes. It's going to require kind of a cultural shift in mindset, because for too long, too many Palestinians have nurtured what, in my view, is a self-destructive fantasy that one day they are going to reclaim what they imagine to be their ancestral rights in what is now the state of Israel. And that's not going to happen, and that shouldn't happen. But there's no reason, why Gaza, which is, larger but not much larger than, say, Dubai or Abu Dhabi, can't in 20 or 25 years be a thriving city-state, so to speak. Singapore is one. Hong Kong is another. There's no reason why Palestinians can't thrive in Ramallah or Jenin or Nablus or Jericho, other Palestinian cities in the West Bank. What it really takes is going to be a combination of leadership, which they haven't had, and a genuinely different mindset about what their national aims are. And we've seen this happen before. Germany used to be a synonym for militarism. Japan was a synonym for militarism. That changed.
And also the encouragement and the support of the United States and Israel.
Without a doubt. And as I answer you, I also have to say, when I look at the behavior of these thuggish Israelis who are terrorizing Palestinians night after night.
On the West Bank and places like that.
It's absolutely shameful. And it's a disgrace that the Netanyahu government, with some of the extremists in its cabinet, has done next to nothing to stop it.
This is such an important conversation. What is, in your judgment, the greatest story of our time? Is it a scientific story, a technical story like AI? Is it a political story like the rise of China? What is the big story that, if you had to choose one? of
Charlie,
our
you're reminding me
time.
of Henry Kissinger asking Zhou Enlai
Oh,
in, I
I
don't know,
know, I know,
1972 what
I
the effects
know.
of the French
Yes,
Revolution were, and Zhou said it's too soon to tell.
right.
But I would say this: I've thought about this a little bit. Um, let's imagine, let's fast forward to America's 300th anniversary in the year 2076, and we're sitting in a classroom at, let's say, the University of Chicago, my alma mater. It's a class in economic history, and the professor asks her students to name the most important innovations of the early 21st century, which created the economy of the 21st century in much the same way that, say, airplanes and antibiotics and automobiles created the economies of the 20th century, or the steam engines the 19th. And she asks the students, well, name some inventions. And one student raises his hand and he says, AI. She says, okay, what else? Another student raises her hand and she says, smartphones. A third student says, actually, I think it was fracking and the ability to extract hydrocarbons in a totally different way. A fourth student says, no, it was the commercialization of space. A fifth student says, no, actually, it was immunotherapies and the conquest of cancer as the leading killer of the early 21st century. And the professor then takes, jots these separate ideas down and says, what's interesting is that every single one of these innovations and inventions was made in the USA. All of them. All of them. I mean, the Chinese may be trying to catch up to us on AI, but that comes out of California. The immunotherapy revolution comes out of teaching hospitals and medical clinics and pharmaceutical companies, principally in the United States. Some elsewhere, but principally in the United States. The fact that we are, in effect, energy independent at this time of war with Iran and can sustain a war and more or less shrug off, at least in the United States, the effects of the Strait of Hormuz closure. That, again, fracking is a made in USA development. All of them that I listed were made here. So I think the big story, if you ask me, is that the United States continues to underrate its capacity to create the future, its resilience, its ability to renew itself in ways that we ourselves almost never expect.
And it was greatly aided by immigration.
Yes.
And the talented men and women who came from around the world, to get an education, and many stayed and contributed to America in a significant way.
Undoubtedly. And, I've been thinking
and Ronald Reagan, among others, paid tribute to that fact.
I've been asked by my editors at the Times to write a short essay on what I think was the most, to me at any rate, an underappreciated but profoundly important moment in American history. And my answer is the Displaced Persons Act of 1948, signed into law by Harry Truman. It's personal to me because my mother, who had survived World War II in hiding, was able to come with her mother and literally $7 between them in 1950 to America, thanks to the Displaced Persons Act. Mm-hmm. And the fact that we opened our doors to this wave of penniless but ambitious and thoughtful immigrants who contributed so much to what makes America great. And you just go down the list of great Americans, whether it's Sergey Brin, at Google, or Jan Koum, the inventor of WhatsApp, or Andy Grove, the genius behind Intel when Intel was the company,
from Hungary.
Chobani yogurts. I mean, just go down the list, and the number of people who arrived on our shores with nothing but hunger, dreams, and ambition, and made themselves American is just staggering. And I think one of the ways in which we are really harming ourselves right now, but I believe it's going to be temporary, is this acid mistrust and mistreatment of immigrants by this administration. But I love this line, Charlie. Bill Clinton, in his first inaugural, said, I think this ought to be one of the great lines in American rhetoric. He said, "There's nothing wrong in America that can't be cured by what's right in America." Yeah. A beautiful line which has the virtue of being true. And I am sure that despite the damage that the Stephen Millers of the world are doing, we're going to recover just as we recovered from past mistakes, because I really believe America's a great country.
I assume that you believe that all that was part of the American idea still exists.
Yes.
And that has been challenged with different leadership without fail can be restored.
Yes. And you only have to have a bit of historical perspective to realize how true this is. I mean, let's go back to America's 200th, 1976. We had just been humiliated in Vietnam. We had gone through the trauma of the assassinations of the late 1960s. Cities like New York were bankrupt, increasingly ungovernable. The culture had shifted radically in the preceding 10 years in ways that alarmed a lot of, right-thinking Americans, and actually often for very good reasons. And yet we somehow managed to pull out of the 20th century as the world's great power. Go back 40 years before 1976 to 1936, height of the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, the threat of ascendant fascism, the threat of ascendant communism. At many periods in our history, one could be a rational pessimist, right? By just looking at the state of things, just as we can be rational pessimists today for 101 reasons. The secret of America turns out to be that our great strengths tend more often to be hidden than visible. And I think that's in the nature of democracy. In an authoritarian regime, authoritarian regimes showcase their strength and they hide their weaknesses. I mean, the Chinese are great at having, military parades with all of their latest military equipment on display, and they are very good at creating showpiece cities with tall skyscrapers and clean streets, if you can ignore the air pollution. You rarely see in China, because we're not allowed to see vast empty cities of, real estate failures or a skyrocketing percentage of unemployed, ambitious, and disappointed young Chinese. In the United States, here in America, look, you've never read a front page of the New York Times that reads in a banner headline, "Things marginally better today than they were yesterday." But that's in fact usually true. Usually it's the case that things by countless measures are somewhat better today than tomorrow, because open societies focus on what's going wrong rather than what is going right. But that doesn't mean things aren't going right. A lot of stuff is going right. In the 1970s, when a lot of Americans thought this country is going to hell, right? Some guy you'd never heard of named Bill Gates was creating a $1 trillion company, and another guy you'd never heard of named Steve Jobs was creating another $1 trillion company, and then a third guy named Larry Ellison, and so forth, right? But they were doing it in ways that the people of 1976 could never even begin to comprehend, because if you said the word software to an American in 1976, outside of maybe a handful of NASA geeks, they wouldn't know what you were talking about. And yet that, in fact, was where the future was headed, thanks to people who were working in obscurity. And I think the same is true today.
One last question, and I have not been able to get to half of the things, so I have to extract from you a promise to come back
Sure.
to finish the kinds of ideas that I am anxious to talk. What ought to be, for all of us, the great debate of our time? What is at the essence of the American idea today?
I am borrowing this thought from a very talented young congressman named Jake Oceancloss from Massachusetts. But I interviewed him recently. I'll publish the interview soon. He thinks that the real debate is between the patriotism of someone like J.D. Vance, which is a blood and soil patriotism,
right,
and the principled constitutional patriotism that is my patriotism, that believes that what makes America America isn't the rich soil of Virginia or the plains, the Great Plains of Nebraska. It's this idea. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is the core of my idea of what the United States is and what makes the United States a unique experiment in human politics. And I think that debate between a certain kind of nationalism and this other more idealistically rooted, you might even say ideologically rooted, or at least philosophically rooted patriotism, at least in the United States, that to me is the central debate. If you're asking what the large debate is in the world, that's different. I think ultimately it's the same debate that the West has been having for at least more than 200 years, which is the debate between liberalism and illiberalism. Liberalism, which comes in many forms, including some more nationalistic forms, and the illiberalism that's represented by Xi in China and Khamenei, if he's still alive, in Tehran, and Putin in Moscow. There's a line in one of my favorite novels, The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann.
Right.
And actually much of that novel
set in Davos.
Right. And much of that novel is, in fact, revolves around this debate between liberalism and illiberalism. And the character, Mann's character, who epitomizes the illiberal instincts of the time, a kind of a proto-Bolshevik character named Leo Nafta, he says somewhere in the book, he says something like, it's a cruel misunderstanding of youth to believe that at the heart of man's desire is the desire to be free, at the heart of man's desire is the desire to obey. It's the debate between freedom and obedience. And I think those of us in the free world sometimes underrate the psychological tug and appeal of a politics of obedience. But it is there, it's real, it's potent, and that I think was, and will be the foundational debate in the world.
I think so too. To borrow from you, for me, it is between order and freedom. And secondly, the great debate here that Jake Auchincloss, the congressman, alluded to, is between an idea and soil.
Right. That's it.
And you can sum them up in that powerful way for me. And that goes to the essence of our future. And we're constantly surprised by events. And at the same time, we're constantly surprised by the resilience of a powerful idea and how it is never expunged.
You know, there's always a tension, not just politically, but psychologically, in rooting our identity in where we come from versus where we want to go.
Exactly.
And on balance, and I understand the profound appeal, and in many ways I subscribe to it, the identity of where we come from. I mean, anyone who takes their, at least as a Jew, anyone who takes their Jewishness seriously is always mindful of that, because we're reminded of it every Passover. We're reminded that we were slaves in Egypt. But the American promise is that what really identifies us is not who we are or were, but what we're struggling to become. And that's the other additional beautiful thought in our founding documents, which comes not from the Declaration, but from the Constitution. That line, in order to form a more perfect union. It's a profound, resonant, psychologically astute, and philosophically foundational idea. A more perfect union. That is what we're always trying to do in the United States. And the idea of ever greater perfectibility as a fundamental human aspiration was never so well expressed. And I think it's one of the reasons why I'm basically confident about America's prospects, for all of my dismay about aspects of our present.
Thank you so much for your time.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Charlie.
Join me, become a subscriber to Charlie Rose Global Conversations, and make it a better experience. Click this link to subscribe.